are ice.
That's fair. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks, Luis, Harry, Claudio. So just quick introductions to the topic for today. So today we're going to be talking about how to create a Ionic and Angular and Phaser application. And we created a little mobile game, very much like Candy Crush, called OpenForge, that the team is going to be talking with everyone about and presenting. Just some overall rules. If you are online and you have any questions, please feel free to either raise your hand or to just post in the questions in the chat feature. And I will either interrupt the speakers if the question is relevant at the time, or I'll save it for the end, just depending on what the question is. But the questions will not get lost, I promise. So please feel free to ask them as you think of them. We have open sourced all of this. So not only the application itself, but also some of the capacitor plugins. We're going to be going over those. And let me just do a quick intro of who our speakers are. So we have Luis is going to be talking about the overview of the game and Ionic and Phaser, that matchup, how that works, right? And talking about the kind of the structure of the project. Claudio is going to be talking about how and why you would add Ionic and capacitor to Phaser and some of the platform specific configurations. Is that right, Claudio?
That's right.
All right, cool. And Harry, if I got my notes right here, you are going to be talking about how the steps for adding the capacitor plugin and hooking up Game Center with the iOS and Android version. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I think everyone is good then. I am going to go on mute here, and Luis, I'll pass it over to you. If you want to just maybe give a quick intro of who you are and your experience, each of you guys when you go through, and then if you can give an overview of the game, I will pass it to you. Can you present or no?
Yeah, I think I will. Oh no, it's disabled.
All panelists, try now.
Yeah, I think it's working.
All right.
Yeah.
All yours, Luis.
Okay, yeah, so hi, I'm Luis. I'm the lead architect of OpenForge. I've been working on mobile apps from like 6 years ago, and also have worked on mobile game development a few times with first directly native on iOS, and then more recently on HTML5 games with Phaser and other frameworks. So yeah, I think what I will do first is just show the game a little bit, then show you what are the minimum required things that you have to do to use Phaser in Ionic, and then show an overview of the structure and the game code and project itself. So yeah, the game, as Jare mentioned, is very similar to Bejeweled or Candy Crush. It's just a match 3 game. So you just drag the animals and try to form matches of 3 horizontally or vertically. We have some features like particle effects. We have some power-ups in case you don't find places to make matches. And when you reach certain score, like 1000, you get to the next level and you get a new animal, so it becomes more difficult. And when you run out of power-ups and possible swaps, there is a game over, so you will have to restart the game in order to play again. So yeah, now I think...
Is someone's alarm going off?
Oh, I think it's an alarm here in the building.
Oh,
that sounds like a fire alarm, buddy.
Yeah, but it's.
Need to evacuate?
No. So I will switch to the project now. So yeah, the first thing that we have to do is to add Phaser to the project. So it's just a simple npm install Phaser. We're using version 3, that is the most recent. And then one thing that you have to do is to go to the ts config and add script host here. This is because Phaser uses some ActiveX stuff for Internet Explorer. So for now, if we don't add this, you will get some errors. So make sure to add it. And the structure of our project is, we have three main parts. We have a homepage that is basically just Ionic. We have a phaser part that contains the main scene of the game. This is where all our game code is. And then we have, we need something to be able to connect the phaser part with the Ionic part. So we have this game instance service that is where we will essentially do that connect. So the first thing that we need for phaser is to give it like a place in the page to be run. So we add this this div with this ID. So this will be the root that where the phaser scene will be injected and rendered, either with WebGL or Canvas. Then on this part, what we are going to have to do is to initialize that rendering of the game. So we are doing this by using the game service that we created, and we initialize it with this method. So then if we go to the service, we start having some phaser code right here. So this is the main game object on phaser, and this is where we initialize everything. So this is the init that we were calling in the homepage. And here we define, for example, the plugins that we're going to use, the size of the game. So with this, we're saying the game to be rendered in the screen size that we're using. This is the type of rendering. If we put auto here, it will try always to render it using WebGL first. And if it's not supported by the browser, it will go and use Canvas. Then we define the scaling method. So here we are resizing the game to the screen size and centering it on the screen size. And here is where we attach this to the ID that we put on our component here in the homepage. So if you see, it's the same ID. And here we're telling it to actually create the game container in that div. Here we define the scenes. In this case, we just have the main scene with all the game stuff inside just that scene, but we can even put more than one scene here and make transitions between them if we need it. And this is just configurations for the frames per second. And then this is the part where we actually inject in some way the game service into our game. So here we're creating the game instance as a new phaser game, and we are adding this same service as a property of the game instance. So this will let us instantiate this service and use the methods and properties that we have here on the service. So these methods can be used either from the Ionic side or from the phaser side, and that's how we do the connect between the two. So finally, if we go to the main scene, that is where we actually have most of the phaser code, where we are like having all the functions and functionalities of the game. We are getting that instance of the service through here, because the scene manager has the game instance as a parent, so we can get the game instance service from there. And now I will overview just a little bit of what a phaser game has and what is its architecture. And so for this game, we have a matrix, that is where we will have all the different tiles. By tiles, I mean the animals that you can swap in the board.
And can you show us those again? Just because they're cute, I want to see them.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, this this is a matrix behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. So it's like a one-on-one relation.
Yeah, exactly. This for now is filled with null, but it will be filled with the actual sprites. And here we have all the different types of animals, and we have it here in an array because at some point we want to shuffle them to every game use different animals. So then what a phaser game scene has is basically some main functions that are like the life cycle of the scene. So first we have the preload. That is where we are going to load all the assets that we're using. So here we have, in this game, we have a spreadsheet, we have some SVGs, and we have just an image for the particles, and we are loading them here, and I can show you what they look like quickly. So this is the sprite sheet for the animals, and these are all the SVG components for the hood stuff. And this is the particle that shows when we make matches. Then we have the create function that it will happen just after the preload, and it's essentially to create all the initial stuff that we need for the game. So as I said before, here we are getting the game instance service, and we are adding all the initial stuff like backgrounds, adding the particle emitters, adding all the hot graphics, the text.
For those of us like me, who are completely oblivious to everything, what would the emitters be like in the actual gameplay?
So this is an emitter. This is just essentially an object that at some point I will tell you emit some particles at this position. So it's over there, and then when this happens, we're just calling it to emit those particles. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And finally, we initialize our power-ups and initialize the tiles. And then the other main function of the phaser thing is the update that will happen in every step. So it's the main game loop. So for example, for this game, what we have here is essentially to check if the user is trying to make a swap. So when the user tries to make a swap, this active tile one will be the tile that the user pressed. And here we check where the user is moving it, to which direction. And if it passes over another tile, it will actually make the swap and check if there are matches. And basically, like all the other functions are functions of the game. I can do a quick overview of what we have, but it would be better just to go into the code and look at them or more detailed. So these are functions for the power-ups to initialize them, and when we trigger them, this function makes sure that we have different animals for each game by shuffling the tile types. This is the function to initialize the board. And so we add the tiles and we check for matches to make sure that the board is playable. Then we have functions to add the tiles. We have, for example, twins to make the movement of the tiles when they enter from the top of the screen to the place that they have to occupy inside the board. Then we have that function to know which tile is being pressed and to swap the tiles, also with twins to make the movements between them. We have the function for when we check matches and check if there is an actual match of 3, we remove the tile groups and reset the board. And we also check if there is a game over after we make all the check of the matches. When there is a game over, as I said, it's because we're out of power-ups or out of moves. So we show game over text with some twins to make it animated. And we have functions also to clear all the tiles when the power-ups are used. And the functions to clear after a move is finished, to clear that to active tiles.
And there's a quick question from Greg Marine. He said there's a lot of code in the main CNTS. Is there any way to break that down into includes?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. You can break it down as much as you like. You can have most of these functions on other places. So this is just to show like a quick example. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And if I remember right, I think we based a lot of the logic off this from I think Josh Maroney's one tutorial, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
I posted the link.
Posted the link.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, if you see the link, you will see a more detailed explanation of each of these functions.
Yeah. So we don't want to get too much into the.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Greg. We don't want to get too much into the into like the details of the I guess the gameplay calculations, right? Because that that was for Josh Maroney did that. He did a great job. Luis, when we were setting up the project, right? What were like some of the issues we had from kind of like the tutorial when Josh last made it, right, versus the latest version?
So yeah, the main thing is that the tutorial is on Phaser 2, so we had to upgrade it to Phaser 3. So there are just different like stuff that we have to send to the methods of Phaser, like for twins, for creating the graphics and all that stuff. Just little tweaks that they made on the latest version.
What I don't know if you know this or Harry, if we know like the big differences between Phaser 2 and 3.
That's more of a Luis question because he did Phaser 2. Actually, one of them is the in Phaser 3 you can have multiple scenes. So like every other game editor, you can separate your collections of objects into different scenes. Like you might have a loading scene that doesn't need a bunch of references to objects that it's never going to see. But I believe in Phaser 2 you had one game instance and you had to kind of add and remove game objects and kind of do all these scene transitions manually instead of something that's built into the framework. Also, you can have more than one scene running at a single time, so you could have, some kind of these picture-in-picture modes. You could do your mini-map in one scene and then have the actual game in another scene, keeping them separate, letting you move the camera that's pointed at that set of game objects, around the map.
And not also having them exist, but also running concurrently, right? You can have multiple scenes.
Yeah.
I'm taking a picture. Gotta do the tweets. All right, cool. And oh yeah, you said, Luis, you used Phaser 2 before?
Yeah, a while ago, like 3 years ago.
Oh, okay. What was that for? Is that for a different project or something?
Yeah, at the moment I was working on slot machine games because they just started opening the legislation for being able to play slot machine games on phones and not just on casinos.
That's
So some
cool.
migrations, yeah.
That's cool to know that casinos are using web technologies. Okay.
The rocket launch, they're using JavaScript out in space.
I saw that too. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, basically here we just have like the map of the game, just checking for the matches in the grid and checking if there are more swaps possible, but trying different grids after making swaps. So yeah, that's mainly this scene is where you would put your own game and be able to run it inside Ionic. So I guess I will pass it to Claudio.
Cool. Oh, and what's the URL if anyone wants to play on their phone?
Oh, here it is.
And did we fix the bug? I know there was a bug with /home.
Yeah.
We fixed that? Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So can you post that in the chat? Or actually, Claude, if you have it, can you post it in chat?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yeah, we'll post that up so everyone can see. Because yeah, you can play just without even downloading it as a essentially PWA. So.
Wait, I'm literally typing it. Don't take it off the screen.
All right, cool. I want we should do a competition. If you're going to play today, you can take a screenshot and see who gets the highest score while we're presenting.
All right, that should work.
All right, awesome. Any other questions for Luis? Oh, awesome. We got the link. All right, cool. So yeah, thanks, Luis. So I guess Claudio.
Sure.
All you, bud.
All right. So like Jedi mentioned, one of my talking points was talk a little bit about why you would want to use Ionic plus capacitor coupled with phaser. And the answer is really that both are great at doing their own thing. Like, I don't know, well, you might have seen in the code, game frameworks like phaser are great for manipulating objects, placing them, but they're not the same as like just working with HTML. And it's great when you have game related stuff. It allows you to build and manage your game objects really well. But when you have interstitial screens, like a menu screen or like a choose your level screen, it would be really easier to just build that out with straight up HTML. And using Ionic lets you use either Angular or React, whichever one you're more comfortable with. And also, as Luis showed, you can interface Phaser along with any services that you might want to build. And actually, I'm going to pull up the code real quick in a second and show you guys. We're building a service that handles vibration. And one thing we're doing with Capacitor is we're using two of their core plugins to, one, add a haptic feedback every time the user presses a tile, vibration on the device when a match is found in the grid. And we're also using the motion API to trigger those bomb power-ups by shaking the phone. All right, so
and Claudio, before you dive into that, just one of the things you mentioned, right, is like why we use both of them together. Well, like, could you think of an example of, like what's an example of an app that you should just use Ionic for? What's an example of an app you should just use Phaser for?
Oh well, if you're building a game, my first choice would not be Ionic. I mean, if you're doing a game that's mostly, or an app that's mostly presentational stuff, like nothing moving a lot, like forms and stuff like that, then Ionic would be your go-to. Whereas if you're building a game that's, I don't know, 2D scroller or anything using physics or anything like that, you definitely want to go with a framework like Phaser. And like I mentioned there, if you want to combine both, maybe your main chunk of the game is where you use Phaser, but then you might have other little screens along the way that can be a real pain to build with Phaser. I mean, you're talking about manually positioning text, managing backgrounds, images, assets in a different way that you might be accustomed to. So that's where combining the two really brings out the strength.
Yeah, and I know like for one of the projects we're working on, Star Wars, right? Like the core gameplay is more game-like, and that's only a very small piece of the app. Whereas we have so much of the app is story, in which it's literally just a scene after a scene after a scene with just a still image and text. So I think that's like a good example. This example we created today, right? It's an open source project. We created it for the meetup, right? So we didn't have a chance to really go into like a really in-depth game. But I think for anyone out there who is looking to do game development, if you're trying to combine elements of like a story-based game where it's really just like static imagery and text, and there's a lot of it, and then the other part of the game, which would be like more like graphical and and moving animations, it would be, I think, a good strategy for this.
Yeah, not only that, I think Harry will talk a little more about this later, but if you're using a feature, an external feature like a leaderboard, for example, Play Services gives you a way to build that and they have their own UI. But if you wanted to do a feature like that where you're pulling in information and presenting it, then using a framework like Ionic is most likely the way to go there.
Yeah, true. Okay, cool. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, no problem. So as I'm pulling up the code here, we are assuming that either you already created an app with capacitor enabled, or you have added capacitor at a later stage. And what I'm going to show you here is how to add what are called the core plugins of capacitor. And all right, you should be able to see my screen, right?
Yep.
All right, so this is the vibration service that we created, and it does two things. It has a method that gives haptic feedback whenever a user presses a tile, and a method that vibrates the phone whenever we get a match. And
Claudio, it says up there, it says you an hour ago. Does that mean we were working on it up to an hour ago? VS Code doesn't lie.
Get blamed, man. All right, so the first step when using any capacitor core plugin is to actually import the plugins themselves from capacitor core. I wanted to use snippets for this, but I couldn't find the extension, so I just hand wrote it out. But anyway, so yeah, this is the way that you would use a plugin that you wanted to target. In this case specifically, we are using the haptics plugin. And you actually need to extract that from, you have to destructure that from the plugin's object use imported. And at this point, I want to point out a common pitfall that's actually outlined in one of the capacitor documentation, but I ran into it and you might as well. If you try to import haptics directly from capacitor core, oh, it's not yelling at you anymore. But so I guess it's not letting me right now, but in the past, I tried doing something like this, and what this does is it immediately switches to the web implementation of that API. And I think in my case, I forget which plugin I was targeting, but it was working correctly on web. But then when I went to build for a platform, the plugin would not work. And it took me a while to figure out, so just it's good that it's not letting me right now, but it did allow me to do that in the past. But anyway, so now we have haptics imported. All we need to do for the haptic feedback is simply call it, and we're going to do an impact here, and impact takes options, and in this case it's how hard of an impact you're providing. And we are going to import another thing from plugins right here, and that's the haptics impact style. And we're adding a parameter here, and we're going to default it to a light feedback. And that is it for the haptic feedback method. For vibrate, we're going to do the same. We're calling haptics, and we are calling vibrate. I didn't see any options, so it is going to vibrate the phone for some arbitrary duration, but it seemed to suffice for our needs. Next, in the game instance service, we're going to set up a listener using the motion core API. And same way as we did with the haptics feedback, with the haptics plugin, we are going to import first plugins from capacitor core, and then we're going to declare motion. And I was thinking earlier when an hour ago, as Jedi pointed out, another cool potential application for using the motion API is perhaps you have like a mini golf game and you want to have an option where the user can actually take their phone and like simulate the golf swing. So that could be something out there for you guys to try.
Cool.
Um,
Can you access motion from like as like a PWA or no?
Yeah.
You can? Okay.
Yeah, the thing is obviously it's different when you're running on the web versus on the device. I'm not sure if Motion has a web implementation, but I think it's safer to target platform-specific code whenever you can. So yeah,
BlackBerry.
yeah, the library. So we're adding a listener here for acceleration events, and we'll fill up the parameters in a second. Okay, so I'm going to define a threshold that is basically going to be I'm not sure of the units, but whatever unit of acceleration the device has to trigger for the bomb power-ups to trigger. And I'm setting it to 20 because that is the number that worked for me. And now I couldn't find what this callback returned or accepted on the doc. So the way I ended up figuring it out was just running the code on a device and console logging what was here. But it turns out that we get an object that I'm destructuring here called acceleration. And it gives us X, Y, and Z components of acceleration here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the absolute value of these values so that it doesn't matter what direction the user is shaking their phone in, as long as one of these crosses the threshold, we're going to trigger one of our bomb power-ups. And I realized as I'm saying bomb power-ups that it sounds a little aggressive given that the tiles are cute little animals, but I assure you that this was before we settled on a tile on an asset package, so don't judge me there. Okay. Cool. So all we need now is just a simple little if statement, and first we're going to check if we have bomb power-ups remaining, and then we're going to watch for the absolute values of these acceleration components. As long as they are greater than the threshold, then we should trigger the power-up. And Y, Z. Oh, getting blocked by the zoom. Here we go. And in here, we're just going to trigger. We have a behavior subject acting as our communicator from this game instance service to the main scene and phaser, so that once that behavior subject emits, then in the scene we're subscribing to that observable, and we know when to use that bomb power up. And that is essentially it. I wanted to build it here live, but my computer was giving me a lot of issues with the memory on the device, so I don't know if it's gonna be possible, but I built it beforehand on my device so that you can see that we can trigger the bomb power up by shaking the phone. And I just did it there. And also you guys can feel, but every time you tap one of the tiles, you get a small little vibration. And that is essentially it for the live demo.
People are posting their scores. So far, Jamie's winning with 5,860. Awesome. All right, and what was like, I guess what was the biggest challenge in just getting the capacitor hookup?
Oh, when using the core APIs, it's no challenge at all. I mean, Actually, you reminded me of a big part that I went over. When using the Motion core plugin, there is a little caveat for iOS. And let me share my screen once again. I understand that writing documentation is hard because you can't possibly assume you can't know what the average reader is going to know. But I did find that when using the Motion API, it was working well on Android, but it wasn't until we tested on iOS that we found something missing. And we found that we had to look into this section of the documentation, which is the iOS specific configuration when using some of the capacitor plugins and APIs. And in the case of the Motion, there is actually a descriptor that you have to add on the info.plist file on iOS, which essentially is the text that is presented to the user when asking for permission to use one of the device's capabilities. So it was a little bit hard to find, but you have to go to this list of keys. And then all I did was do a little Control F search, and here is what we needed to add. But yeah, after adding this little descriptor in the info.plist file, it was all good to go.
Is that edited through Xcode or is that outside of Xcode?
You can use it through Xcode, or you can go in Visual Studio, go to the platform-specific folder, and you'll find it in the works in one of these. Maybe this is it. I actually did it on Xcode, but it should be somewhere here.
Yeah, I guess the reason I was asking that is because, for like if we were to submit through AppFlow, right? How would we update it? So.
Yeah, you have to upload. I'm actually not sure of how the plist file is managed in AppFlow, but I think it has some interface.
The plist file is in your generated project, so AppFlow uses that.
Okay.
It just runs your sync and stuff. It doesn't rebuild or anything.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, when using capacitor, just make sure that you are adding either iOS or Android specific configurations to the XML or plist files, and everything will run smoothly, hopefully.
All right, awesome. Any questions for Claudio? We have 2 more scores here. Greg got 4,260, and SJ got almost 5,000. So close, SJ. Oh yeah, and Jamie said, "Great job live coding, Claudio." Yeah, that was really good.
It's a daunting experience every time.
That's why I don't do it. That's why I let the brave people do it.
I'm not doing it.
All right, so Harry, you are up, sir.
Serially share.
And remind us what you're talking about again. Ooh, slides.
I have to fix. All right. I lost my screen. I kind of wanted to see what it looked like.
And here, I'm gonna post that link in the chat too, so you guys don't have to manually write it.
Yeah, I can't do full screen. I'm on my desktop. That would just ruin anybody's day because the aspect ratio is insane. So I did for the project, the capacitor game services, and it's on GitHub and published on an NPM repo. And you can use it in your games. All it is, it just kind of wraps some of the basic game services stuff that I know Google, but I'm not sure about iOS. They pulled down some of their web APIs for a lot of their game services stuff. I think at one point they had web APIs for game services like leaderboards and stuff, but I guess they stopped doing that. So now all they have are the native screens for both Android and iOS. So for this project and other projects we're working on at OpenForge, I've been working with Capacitor, trying to get these functionalities into our game. And it includes, sign in with game services, with Google Play and Game Center. It's very hard to rattle that off because it's Google Play services and Apple Game Center services. Those are the actual. So if I mess it up, that's what it's supposed to be.
And this one took a while. Like we've been working on this for a while. You have, right?
Yeah, because for Startup Wars, the game we're working on at OpenForge, and this is kind of the way I recommend writing native stuff for Capacitor the first time around is, and they'll say it in their docs, is just have like a native file like in your project itself. Like don't publish it as an npm. And I had trouble debugging stuff with npm link, so that doesn't really work either, just because like all the special reading from node module stuff that goes on, it just doesn't behave the same. And then for that project, we started out, it wasn't just game services, it also had Firebase in it. So we used the providers for Google Play and Game Center, which are available on Firebase's providers, to authenticate to Firebase. Most of our, I guess pretty much all of our projects at OpenForge are Firebase, so that's where we went down that path. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so I'm not live coding, and I took a bunch of screenshots, and I'm sorry, but they'll switch from really dark contrast, really high contrast. So I hope you have the lights on in your room, because it might hurt your eyes. So when you sign in, there will be like the native sign-in intent, and this is for iOS. I already signed in, so your silent sign-in is going to give you a pop-up that says welcome back. And then the achievements that we put in the game were just score achievements. So you reach a certain score, you post that to Game Center or Play Services, and you'll get the native intent pop-up. And then in those applications, you can kind of like look at what achievements you got or look at each other's scores as well, because we did do leaderboards. And it looks like Marina beat my score by quite a bit. So I guess I'll have to up it. So I guess I'm going to start with the screenshot of small amount of code to kind of wrap the Capacitor Game Services plugin. And then the rest of it is just setting up the services. All that stuff probably should be in the documentation, but for right now, you just kind of have to deal with the screenshots. So you import the repository, the npm link, and then I just do a second line, just because it won't run on web the way that I typecast the game services variable if you don't do it that way. So I just did this all in one file. It's the achievement IDs, which are going to go to the backend. There's a way to make sure it's the same value, and then the score that you're going to check. And I used a phaser plugin, which it's probably the best way to kind of separate some of the service behaviors from the rest of the app in Phaser, especially if you're not using something like Angular. Basically, a plugin, if you look at line 70, like I actually wrote all the configuration for importing the plugin there. And the mapping is the property key that the single instance gets injected on. So it's a singleton class. And if you're in a scene object, you'll go this dot achievements, and then you'll have an instance of the achievements plugin. So in that you can call check score achievement state. And all that is, it'll filter any, it'll allow any locked and reach scores. So I have like a little locked property just so I'm not sending requests every single time. You could cache this information, but especially when you're debugging, like, you know, that's just an extra issue that you'll run into and just kind of get confused with. So it's not bad if you're sending like 5 requests every single time. And all this does is check the ID and sends a request. So you need both Google developer accounts and Apple developer accounts to even just play with these services. Just because that's what they asked for. It's a service that's provided like through their actual like publication portals, so that's why. So here I went to the screen where you add new games. So you have to give some information that would be on the App Store, like the name, the category. When you're looking for games in the App Store, a lot of people search by category, so it's pretty important. Then you got to authenticate the Android app. So you'll click link another app, Android, and all they want is the SHA-1 key that you can get from your Android account. You can just, or the local Android folder will have the debug key that you can use just to test with. And then there's one extra step, and this is the part. Normally you have to put a value in the manifest and then get it from the strings XML file. But the plugin, I figured this out recently, that you can sync parts of the manifest from plugins into the application. So all you really need is that final line that says string name app ID, and that's the value under the title here. That's just so it knows what project you're talking about. And then it'll use the key that you validate your app with to validate to here. And then achievements are pretty straightforward. There's one thing I would recommend though, is doing the Google achievements first. The Google Play services, it doesn't let you specify the IDs for the resources that you want, but the Apple plugin or the Apple game services does. So you can go through, do the Google achievements, copy down these ID values, and then when you're doing the game services one, you can just plug those in. Because if you remember from this, I just have one set of achievements. Otherwise, you're going to have to check platform and then, you know, get an ID from that. So I added some achievements. There's no, you know, web API. That's something you would have to write in addition. You could check platform for that. So we got 1,000, 2,000, 4,000. And I didn't do the add step, but like those will show up as the native intents. So you have to give it an image, 512 by 512, and that'll pop up with the title. And when you add a new achievement, there's a description you can add. And there's not one default leaderboard. You actually have to make the leaderboard. And again, you want to do the Google Play services first, just so you can use the same ID value. And then for Google, you have testing accounts that you would want to add. just your whatever Gmail account you're going to be using, or whatever Gmail account is linked to your Google Play Services account. And then there's Apple Game Center Services, lowercase services. So you'll go into your App Store Connect, where you're publishing your applications with Apple, and you go down to the Game Center capabilities and have to enable them. So first you add the app, you add your bundle, SKU can match the bundle, just make sure it's iOS, and the only capability thing you need to do is add game services in your app project or your target. So you'll do the signing part that's closed with your developer credentials, and that's the authentication part because they're both hosted by that. And then you'll click the plus capability, find Game Center, and that's all you have to do there. So in that application, you go to Features and Game Center, and on a single page, you can see all the leaderboards and achievements that you'd want to add to your game. So this is the part where you're going to want to copy the ID values from the Google Play services, and as you're making these entries, make sure you're using those same values. And they do it a little different. It's not on one screen when you're adding a new achievement. You have this first part, which is the kind of the meat, I guess, the reference name, which is just for querying, which you don't really need. But the achievement ID is that's the value you're going to copy. Point value is the kind of like the ranking up. So I think I'm level 13 in Google Play services, and it looks like they have the same thing for Game Center. And you can allocate points like you would any other achievement system, like Xbox achievements. You get a certain amount of XP, and that helps you level up your account. So you can allocate some amount of points from a total of 1,000 to each achievement. And then the localization is actually where like the actual descriptions are going to come from. So for each language, you'll have to add title, pre-earned description, and earned description. Google Play Services only has one description. So for this project on Game Center, I just copied the same one. And then on this, you add the same image, probably. I wouldn't think you'd add a different one. And then same thing for the leaderboard. You need to use the same leaderboard ID. And they have more configuration options with the suffix. The sorting is also in Play Services. And then how you're going to format that in the leaderboard intents. And then you're good to go. And I'm going to do the achievements first. Because I got to score 3,000, and then while Claudia was speaking, I realized that there wasn't one for 3,000. So I'm at, if this works.
Oh wait, can you stop sharing so we can see your bigger screen?
Oh, is it still okay?
Yep. Sorry.
All right, here I am. All right, so I'm at 39,000. Oh, it's flipped. 39,070. 3,970. And let's see if I can do this. Flipped. You'll get that achievement. Oh.
Ooh.
You can't read. I can't read the text.
Yeah.
But I promise it's there. And I lost with that move. And then I guess I'll just close it and then open it back up to do the sign-in intent. So that's the sign-in intent if you already are registered.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I did on the score. If you click the score, you can bring up the leaderboards, and I think I'm the only one doing the Android. You have to add testers, so people have to ask you for it.
Yeah.
And my name is Cherry Eaton, which is kind of a meme at the office.
Awesome. So yeah, so everyone, please please do use the plugin. I mean, it really, I think Harry was working on it for like 2 or 3 weeks. So is it, Harry, a question on behalf of the audience, is there anything missing yet in the plugin, like any like Google Play services like related to achievements or anything that we haven't implemented yet?
I did the incremental achievements.
Okay.
One of the things with, you're trying to write the same code for 2 different plugins. The services don't really align, especially with the incremental achievements. And I think I wrote in the plugin itself that you want to just kind of match the increment value. Because I think Game Center, it's just increments out of 100. And then for Play services, you can actually choose the number that you want to increment towards, like the actual goal that you want to reach. So you just want to make those match. Otherwise, your iOS users are going to be able to unlock something that your Android users might not, or the other way around.
All right, cool.
Yeah, but there's other stuff in the game services for events. Those aren't in it. And then there's some of the stuff is being deprecated on the Google Play services side. They had like multiplayer matchmaking stuff, and all that stuff is gone. And they're getting rid of all that.
Did they say when or no?
Oh, it's gone.
Oh, it's gone. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. You can still use it if your app is already published. I don't know when that deadline is, but we can't add any of it.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, I know that we are at time, guys, and I don't want to keep anyone from further meetings. So I guess, overall, Luis, Harry, Claudio, maybe you could each just give one overall suggestion or piece of advice for, anyone listening in. And if anyone has any questions, I'll try to get to them. But yeah, Harry?
One piece of advice, like code related, I kind of already said it. Just if you're writing your first plugin, do it like the way in the docs where you don't have to import it every time, because you're going to have trouble, knowing what's there. And there's stuff like, what values in your plugins are getting synced to the project, like the app manifest or the string resources that can kind of be confusing. But it's much easier because once you boot up your native project and the only file you're working with is in the app itself, you can just update it in Xcode or Android Studio, and those changes are going to persist. But if you're editing it in the node modules to try and get something to work, then you're going to have to copy that back into the actual repository, and then and linking kind of is brittle, or I found it not reliable, so you'll have to publish it every time as a beta version, and that's kind of what I did for this one.
Okay,
so definitely start with that.
Cool. Luis?
Yeah, I would say like something simple is that in phasers, there are some pain points when adding things like models and forms and things like that. And it's very easy to do that in Ionic, especially if you have worked with Ionic for a long time. So if you're doing a game that eventually will need parts of the menus where you need to add models, inputs, forms, you can try something like all these that we shared today.
All right, cool. And last but not least, Claudio, last words of wisdom.
All right. So I know we went over just 2 of the core capacitor plugins, but definitely go to their documentation and check out which APIs are available to use. I know one that should be very popular, especially with mobile games, is the network plugin, which allows you to monitor the device's network status. And it's always good to let the user know when something's not going to be working right, when the connection is not good or whatever. So that's definitely one to check out, and check out the others to see what ingenious ways you find of incorporating them into your games.
Cool. And what is our, I think we have a topic for the next meetup. Do we? I don't know. Dun, dun, dun.
I know it's got to do with React.
With React. Okay, cool.
Oh.
So Ionic and React. All right, cool. Well, I see everyone's comments. Everyone says great work. So yep, and somebody did say React. So yeah, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for attending. If you guys have any, the Ionic meetup is really run by all of our audience and all the participants. So if you guys have anything that either you want to hear about, anything you want to see built, anything you want to present about, please let us know. Just email me at Jedi@OpenForge or on Twitter. And yeah, you can. We will do our best to get all the topics out there. And with that said, can't wait to see you all next time. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.